Hey everybody, Dave here. Today, I'm going to automate rpachallenge.com again in Blue Prism. You might have seen my other video where I automated rpachallenge.com in Blue Prism 6.10.1. You might think, well, why are you doing that again? Fantastic question. And let me tell you, the basic reasons are that I didn't follow the directions first. So there's a start button, and you're supposed to click the start button when you're doing the automation, and then it's supposed to submit and submit and submit page by page for 10 Excel rows, and then eventually it gives you a result at the end. That result, when I went back and actually implemented the start button into the automation, that result showed 0% successful in Blue Prism. And that's pretty obvious. I used write stages, which sets the value into the web page, but because this web application requires you to type like a person does, I should have actually used global send keys. And that's kind of a common thing. I always try write stages first. If that doesn't work, then I go back and switch to global send keys. But before I realized the start button exists, I didn't have a way to validate whether or not the web page was reading what I was giving it. And now I do. So we're going to go back and fix that. The other thing is that I want to be fair to Blue Prism, the product, because if I'm going to go and automate this same web page in as many other RPA tools as I can, which I've already put a video up about Power Automate Desktop and automating the same web page, I want to be fair to each product. And so what I want to do is automate them all in the same way. And if you were to compare the way that I automated this web page in Blue Prism to the way I automate it in all the other tools, you'd see I put everything on sort of the main page of Power Automate Desktop. I'm going to end up doing the same thing in Studio X. And any tool that I come across, I'm probably going to put everything in the main page or the main method or whatever it's called in that tool. So with Blue Prism, I'm going to do the same thing today. I won't be using a process. We're going to develop everything in the object in a single action, and I'm going to be as lightweight with it as I can and use as few stages as possible to automate this web page. This is not what I'd put in production, but then again, what I'm developing with the other RPA tools when I automate this web page, those are not things I'd put in production either. So I think this will be a more fair representation of what it's like to automate this web page in Blue Prism. And specifically, you'll notice that I also won't be using the XPath manipulation version of dynamically identifying where the fields are. Instead, I'm going to use dynamic match indexes, which is far easier to understand. So let's jump into it and automate rpachallenge.com in Blue Prism 6.10.1, the streamlined version though. We are going to build one object and one action, and that should be all we need. If it takes as long as I expect, should be about 20 minutes to get this thing done. So start your timer. I'm just kidding. Don't start a timer. That'll make me nervous. I'm going to create an object, and we're going to call this RPA Challenge version 2. Next, I'm going to click the box and hit finish. Now, I apologize. I probably won't be explaining as much as I might normally because my focus is going to be on development. Watch, I'll still talk the whole time. I think the first thing we should do is get data out of Excel. Remember, I'm not doing this the same as I might normally. Ordinarily, I would get data out of Excel in the process, but we're doing everything in the object to make it more streamlined. Let's go ahead and create an action that will reference the Microsoft Excel VBO. And what we want to do is open workbook. So we're going to be as streamlined as possible. So I'm not going to be creating instance first. I'm going to leave handle empty, and the file name I'm going to hard code here to be C:\\, and then test, and then challenge.xlsx with double quotes around it. That's going to output a workbook name. I'm going to let it automatically create that for me. And then I'm going to click OK. Let's create the next action, which is just going to be to get data from Excel. So it should be get worksheet as collection fast, and that should just use whatever's open at the time. I'm going to auto create the collection, and it'll be called data. And then let's go ahead and make the stage we need to close the worksheet. So let's do close instance, and I'm going to leave the handle empty again and save changes. I'm going to leave empty because this defaults to 0, this defaults to false. And then let's go ahead and connect these together. And let's move this down a little bit. Let's make sure it works really quick. Open workbook, and it gets the data, and close the instance. I'm going to glance at the data really quick. Okay, that looks good to me. Now let's reset. I should mention before I keep going here that I did change the Excel input data. If you were to download the Excel input from the rpachallenge.com website, there are going to be some issues like with the column names and extra columns and some blank rows. I deleted and fixed all that kind of stuff. And so you might normally automate fixing those, but like I just don't care. So I didn't put it in this. It's not going to be in any of my automation videos for rpachallenge.com because I just think it's outside the context of what we're doing. Okay, let's go ahead and create some application modeler elements. So I'm just going to leave this named RPA challenge. Hit next. I'm going to choose Chrome, and then we want to launch from an executable. Let's browse to it. G for Google, Chrome, application, Chrome. Next, let's go with http://rpachallenge.com. Here's where you might type force render accessibility, but I'm not using UIA mode. We're only going to be using the browser mode. So there's a few elements that I know I'm going to need, so I'm going to go ahead and just name them all. I know that I will need one called label. I want a child element then called input. And these are going to be dynamic elements that will reference any label or any input. Let me create another element. Let's bring up the web page so I can think about what I need here. Okay, so we need one called start. And we need one called submit. And then I'm going to need a final one that we'll just use for the entire Chrome window. All right, let's go ahead and launch. There is a slight problem in Blue Prism where you kind of have to launch two versions of the web page before it will connect properly from Application Modeler. No big deal. And then we're going to hit identify on this label. I'm just going to go like this for the first name, and then I'm going to organize by match, and then I'm going to deselect a few of these things. I want match index 1 and label and this. And so what I'm going to end up doing is changing this to dynamic so that I can tell it to look for a different one if I need. And that should be good. Let's go to the input and spy this. I'm going to deselect most of this stuff. And I also want the match index. Let's resort that. Okay, so input. All right, so I'm going to close that second web page just so that I know which one I'm spying. I'm going to hit highlight. Okay, so that works. And let's click the label, highlight, and that one works. And then let's go to the start button. Let's identify that one. I want to deselect path. I just want button, RPA challenge. I also am going to find where it says start. It should say start somewhere. There it is. And I want match index always because it's my best friend. Highlight. That looks good. Let's go to the next one. Submit. Identify. I'm going to do the same thing. Matter of fact, I can just go like this. Copy element mask. Paste element mask. And that should automatically select the same things. Hit highlight. Awesome. And then the Chrome window, I'm going to use Win32 mode for this. Spy the entire window. And I'm going to use this for activating. So let's deselect all this stuff. And we'll leave window text, class name, and match index just because. Highlight. That looks good. And let's click OK. So we've got our application modeler elements built out. Now what we need to do is start by launching. So let's go to the navigate stage, grab RPA challenge, the root node. We'll name this launch. Choose launch in here. And I believe we don't need to input anything down here because it'll just use what's default in application modeler. Click OK. And then, so I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and I'm going to launch the web page first. Then I'm going to get the Excel data, and that's going to give me a little bit of time for the web page to load. So normally I might be a little more robust with this, but we're not going to right now. The next thing I'll do after getting the data from Excel, so I'm going to launch, get the data from Excel, and then I want to make sure that I am connected to the application in case it launches and it's not connected. is connected. Let's store that into is connected. And then we're going to use a decision stage. Is connected, question mark. Let's just drag over the flag. And then if we are connected, then we'll just go this direction. If we're not connected, we need to attach. So let's use a navigate stage. Attach. And then the window title is going to be RPA challenge star. Process name is going to be Chrome. We'll go ahead and name this attach. And I guess I'll rename this get is connected. The node path is going to be to attach. Then we'll need a little anchor just to bring ourselves back over to the path right here. Let's delete the yes path, go to this anchor like that. Okay, so after we have attached, then we can go ahead and click start. You know what? Before we keep going, let me bring this stuff down. I know that we're going to need the count of those Excel items. So let's do that. Let me create an action stage. Change this to collections, count rows, and then the collection we want is data. I'm going to have to change this to quotation marks. And the output, I just want to be the count. As a matter of fact, let's rename that total rows. Change this to output to total rows. Like this, and then we're going to use it later on to validate whether or not we are finished working on stuff. Let's go ahead and click on the start button. Drag start over here. Actually, I should rename this click start. And let's do click OK. Should we pause after this? Let's go ahead and pause for 2 seconds after. Again, I might normally use a conditional wait, but here we are. So I'm going to click start, and then it'll wait for 2 seconds, and then we'll start entering data. Now we need to loop through the Excel rows, and we also need to loop through all the fields. So here's how we're going to do that. We are going to have 2 data items for index numbers, basically. We need a match index, which we're going to default to 0. And we also want an Excel row index. And we'll leave that one defaulted to 0. Now, before we start our loop, I know that we need to make sure. So what's going to happen is where we start this loop, that's where we're going to start it. We're going to go down, do some stuff. And then when we need to come back to the next Excel row, we're going to loop back up again. So let's set the value of both of these in the same stage. Let's name this next Excel row. And then we'll do 2 things in here. We will set the value of match index to 0. The reason for that is whenever we loop through all the fields, the match index is going to get up to 7 or 8 or something like that because there's 7 or 8 fields. And then we need to reset the match index back to 0 to loop through them all. Let me go to row index. We're going to increase that one. Row index plus 1. And then we're going to store that back into row index. Okay, so this is the start of our loop. So I know that we're eventually going to need to connect back up to it like this. The first thing we can probably do is go ahead and activate our application. That means in Blue Prism to bring it to the foreground. So let's use our Chrome window element. We'll say activate window for the name of this stage. We want to activate application. Let's do a little bit of a pause after this, like maybe 0.2 seconds. Probably should be longer than that, but this will probably be fine. Let's activate the window just in case it gets pulled from the foreground while we're testing. Okay, so at this point, match index is 0, and we're going to need to loop and increment the match index each time that we input a field. And I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to increment match index plus 1. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, wait. Do we want that? Yeah, match index plus 1. Let's go make sure we didn't do this other one wrong. Yeah, row index plus 1 goes into row index. Okay. And then match index goes into match index. Okay, and so what we can do is we start on 0, which is not a field. There's no 0 match index. Match index 1 is the first one. So then we will read the location of the first label. So let's read a label. See, let's get web text of the first label. For the dynamic input, we changed match index to dynamic. And so effectively what we're doing is saying, hey, look at the first one, use match index 1, find the first one that matches label, and then tell me what the text is of that. And I'm going to put that into a data item called web text. Once we have the web text, then I can use that to read from the collection, because I will have read something like first name. And I know that there is a field name called first name in that collection. So what I can use is read collection field. I'm going to read in data for the field name that matches whatever I just pulled from the web page. So if the first one is first name, then great, I'll read the first name field. Which row index are we on? Well, that's where this comes in. I'm going to use row index right here. And then in this case, because we will have already incremented to 1, I'm going to do a -1 on this. Might be slightly confusing. You don't have to do it like this, but I choose to because what I want is row index to not be 0 index based. It's confusing to me. I want it to match what my mind says is the first row. So effectively, I incremented the row index to 1, and then I'm going to subtract 1 so that it actually gets the 0 row. I hope that's not super confusing, but that's how I'm doing it. And then let's put the value from the Excel row for that field into value. And the next thing I want to do is enter that value into the proper field. So we already know which match index it is because we've already found the match index from label, or we've already found the web text for that. So we're going to use the same match index when we focus. So basically put the cursor or the blinking cursor into the field. Input value. And I want a bit of a wait. So let's do 0.2 for a pause after each step. I'm going to add a second row to this. And here I'm going to use global send keys. It's hard to read there, but it's there. Global send keys. And what I want to type is the value. Now the interval, I've messed around with this a little bit, and what I like is 0.01 for the interval for how much time between each letter that you type. So this looks kind of like somebody who'd type fast if I put it as 0.01. Click OK. And then the other thing I need to do, move these data items out of the way, is that when we get to this point, what we've got to do is make sure that there's no infinite loop. So I'm going to create a block, catch block around this. When we get to get web text and we try to read the 8th field, it's going to throw an error. Again, this is not robust thinking, what I'm doing right here. There's better ways to do this, but it's fine as like a starter idea and for kind of demo purposes. What I'm doing is recovering an error from get web text. And what I'm assuming is that it won't error out until we get to the 8th field, which doesn't exist. When it gets to that point, then I'm going to recover, resume, and what I'll do is click the submit button. So let's get the navigate stage. Name this click submit. And then I want to probably a little bit of a wait after this. Let's do a 1-second wait after click submit. And then we need these to come together. Let's use a decision stage to use that data item that we created earlier for total rows. Let's bring that down here actually. Okay, let's check the value of total rows to determine whether or not we have reached the last row. So do we have any more rows? Well, the way we determine that is total rows greater than row index. So actually, maybe that's why I did my -1 thing, because my idea is it makes sense to me. If the total rows is greater than the row index I'm on, then we still have more rows to go. If that's terribly confusing, it's a small part. We'll just move on. So I'm just kidding. You can ask a question in the comments and then I'll respond. I respond to comments religiously these days. So what we do is get the web text, read Excel field, and then input the value. And then we keep doing this if we have more rows until eventually it errors out because we're at the eighth field. And then it's going to error. It'll click submit. And then we'll go to, so we still have more. All right, the logic here is that we are going to go to the next row, which is the first one. It's going to be the first row that it goes to. Activate the window. Let's increment the match index because we're on 0. So we go to the first one, which is 1. It's going to be this field. Let's get the web text. That'll give us phone number. Read the Excel field for phone number. It's going to give us back a value for phone number. We will input that value into the input that matches the same index. So we're going match index 1. Give input into the first field, which is going to be this one. Then it's going to go, oh, more rows? Yep. Okay, well, let's go to the next row, and let's keep doing this, right? But it's going to do this for every single field. Wait, get web text. Wait, how does this? Okay, right. So slight modification. I just stared at my own diagram here and realized that this doesn't actually make sense. We have to delete the connection between input value and more rows because what we want it to actually do is keep looping up here. Like this. Now, it's going to activate the window once for each set of fields. It's going to increment the match index. So it'll go from 0 to 1, get web text of phone number, read the Excel field for phone number, input the value for phone number. Then it's going to loop up, increment the match index. It's going to go to the second field for company name. It's going to get company name. It's going to get the value for company name. It's going to input the value for company name, and so on and so forth till we get to the 8th field, which doesn't exist. It's going to throw an error, go to here, resume. It's going to click submit. Then we have more rows. Yes, we do. Well, let's keep going. Go to the next row, do the same thing all over again until eventually we don't have anything left. Now, the only thing I'm going to leave off of here is I'm not going to close the application because I kind of want to see the results at the end. So let's save this and put the classic ... to save the application. And then let's close this and see if it works. We should check for errors, but we just did. Let's hit play. I'm going to run this at a slow speed first, and then I'll crank up the speed a little bit more to test it after that. Okay, so it's gotten the Excel data. It counted the Excel data. It's verifying, are we attached? Nope, it's not attached. So let's attach to the application, to the web app. Click start. Okay, so you can see it says round 1 right there. It's going to activate the window like it just did. I'm not going to touch the keyboard or anything. It's getting the web text for each field and then getting that associated value from the Excel spreadsheet on that specific row. And then it's going to enter it into the web page. Okay, we have a problem. It entered the value into the same field. So what we need to do is figure out why it did that. It used match index. Let's make sure that okay, here's what we did wrong. In application modeler, my input field also needs to be match index dynamic so that it doesn't enter into the first field every single time. Let's click OK. And then wherever we're using that input, right here should be both of these. Let's hit the parameters, set the match index to use match index. And this one too. Match index, OK, click OK. Let's reset and let's close the application and try it one more time. This time, let's make it go a little faster. All right, so everything's looking good. We clicked start, and now it is entering data. So this is going to be different from how I did it before, where it was always going to enter first name first, then last name second, and stuff like that in the previous way I did it. In this case, it's always going to enter the data from the top left to the bottom right, because it's always looking at the first field. It determines what's the first field. Then it goes and gets the data that it needs for that specific field. Let me just say that this is not bad. In my opinion, this is not that many stages. If I compare this to what I did in Studio X or Power Automate Desktop, they're really very similar in the number of actions or activities or stages or whatever you want to call it. The difference is that there are some things that are nice in the other RPA tools that are for more quality of life and to kind of just make me have to think a little bit less. Now, granted, Studio X was heavily built for business users, and I think they succeeded in that. Power Automate Desktop, on the other hand, I would not consider it easier to do that than it is to automate in Blue Prism. I no longer think that, because I did have to use a special method to identify an input dynamically based upon its label. And if you go watch that video, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it was kind of like some query syntax. And if I don't know it, I don't expect the average person to. So in my opinion, ease of use between those three, Studio X, Blue Prism, Power Automate Desktop, that's the order I'd put it in ease of use. Speed of development is going to be UiPath Studio X is faster. Now, granted, it's limited in functionality, but it does this no problem. Then Power Automate Desktop is a little slower than that to develop in, and then Blue Prism comes in last. But I have to say, they're literally minutes from each other. I mean, you saw how relatively easy this was. Granted, it's what I might consider a slightly more than basic technique in Blue Prism, because once you start using dynamic attributes in Application Modeler, you are getting into what I might consider slightly more advanced techniques. But it's not really that hard to understand. If you mess around with match index at all, if you're not comfortable with match index right now, if you are not including match index as an attribute that's selected in your elements, then you should consider starting to use that. Once you use it more and more, you will realize its functionality, and then it's just a small leap in logic for how to use it dynamically. It looks like we are on round 9. I sure hope that we get a good grade on our test, because it's going to give us a grade at the end. I think that our time, if you were timing this, I think our time as far as 20 minutes is concerned, I probably went a little over that because I think I talked more than I really intended to. And if I weren't explaining it to somebody, it would take less time. But granted, I think that I can develop kind of along those lines in the other tools, explaining to somebody while I do it. So it just makes sense. So let's say it's a little over 20 minutes for Blue Prism to automate this application. So we got 100% on our test, and it took us apparently 217,000 milliseconds. Great. I'd say this is a success. From my perspective, Blue Prism absolutely gets a passing grade on this website. I was a little harsh on it before with the whole, there's no anchors in Blue Prism? I still think there needs to be anchors, but it's not 100% necessary in this website. The time when editing or manipulating the XPath really comes into play, like I did in the last video, it comes into play when the website you're automating is really complex. If there's a lot of elements on the page and Blue Prism feels kind of sluggish or slow to automate it. The fact is that there are some websites that are just extremely slow to automate the user interface of. You kind of have to do XPath or path manipulation whenever you want to automate those web pages, expecting elements to be dynamically located on the page. It can just be really tough to do it the way I just did, using only match index, because the responsiveness will just be slow. All right, well, that has been rpachallenge.com in Blue Prism, the streamlined version. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.